Have you ever felt invisible? Imagine standing in a room full of people who used to be your world, watching your ex-husband flaunt his new, younger wife. You can feel the whispers, the pitying stares, the crushing weight of being yesterday's news. That was Clara Moreau's reality. A woman discarded for a shinier model. But what happens when the most powerful, enigmatic man in the city, a billionaire nobody can get close to, walks past everyone, looks right at you, and changes your entire world with a single public kiss? This isn't just a story of revenge. It's about the moment a forgotten woman remembers her own power, and the man who threw her away is forced to watch her rise. The invitation had arrived a week ago, a thick slice of ivory cardstock resting on her reclaimed wood coffee table like a ghost. The embossed gold lettering of the Metropolitan Foundation Gala glittered under the soft light of Clara's Brooklyn apartment. An annual event, a universe she had once orbited, a universe that belonged to David. Clara Moreau ran her thumb over the sharp edge. For 5 years, this gala had been a landmark in her calendar, a night of borrowed diamonds and strained smiles, of holding David's arm so tightly her knuckles went white. She was Mrs. Miller then, the quiet, elegant accessory to an investment banker on a meteoric rise. Her own career, landscape architecture, had been neatly packed away like winter clothes, a hobby, he'd called it, something to keep her busy while he built their empire. After the divorce, the empire had turned out to be his alone. Now, a year later, the invitation felt like a test, a dare. Her freelance business was finally gaining traction, a small but steady stream of clients who wanted her thoughtful, sustainable garden designs. She was paying her own bills, watering her own plants, sleeping diagonally across her own bed. She was healing. But was she healed enough for this? "You should go," her friend Maya had insisted over the phone. "You need to walk into that room and own it. Show him you're not just surviving, you're thriving." Thriving felt like a strong word. Breathing most days felt like a victory. But Maya was right. Hiding felt like letting him win. So Clara had pulled out the one dress David had always hated. It was a deep emerald green, a slip of silk that clung and flowed in ways he'd deemed unbecoming for a banker's wife. It was her dress. Tonight she would be Clara Moreau, not a ghost of a Mrs. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a dizzying constellation of crystal and champagne. The air hummed with the electric current of money and influence. Clara took a flute from a passing tray, the bubbles a welcome sting against her tongue. She kept to the perimeter, a satellite in a galaxy of stars, observing the familiar faces. They nodded, their eyes flicking with a brief, pitying curiosity before moving on. She was a piece of gossip that had long gone cold. Then she saw them. David stood near the marble staircase, a king in his court. He looked the same, impeccably tailored tuxedo, a confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. But the woman on his arm was new, Sophie Vance. Clara knew of her, of course, the daughter of a real estate tycoon, 24 years old, with a face like a porcelain doll and eyes that held a glint of hard-won possession. The diamond on her finger was an iceberg, catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was twice the size of the one he'd given Clara. Clara's breath hitched. She had prepared for this, rehearsed her cool, indifferent smile in the mirror. But the reality of it, the sheer, blatant upgrade, was a physical blow. Sophie laughed, a tinkling sound that carried across the room, and leaned in to whisper something in David's ear. He smirked, his gaze sweeping the crowd with proprietary arrogance. For a moment their eyes met. Across the expanse of shimmering gowns and black ties, David saw her. The smirk on his face didn't falter, but something else flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? Clara couldn't tell. He held her gaze for a beat too long, a silent acknowledgement of the history that lay between them like a minefield. Then he turned his attention back to Sophie, dismissing her. The cut was so sharp, so absolute, it stole the air from her lungs. She had been the woman who straightened that very tie, who reminded him of his colleague's wife's name, who soothed his ego after a bad day at the market. Now she was a stranger across a crowded room, a ghost in a green dress. Maya was wrong. Coming here wasn't a triumph. It was a self-inflicted wound. Clutching her small bag, Clara turned, desperate for an escape, for a quiet corner where she could piece her shattered composure back together. From David Miller's perspective, the world was exactly as it should be. The champagne was crisp, the air was thick with the scent of success, and Sophie, his perfect pedigreed wife, was a warm and beautiful weight on his arm. He was 35, a senior VP at a top firm, and married into a dynasty. He had orchestrated his life with the precision of a master strategist. Seeing Clara was an unexpected and slightly irritating variable. She stood alone near the bar, looking startlingly good in that green dress he'd always despised. It was too much, too revealing of the graceful lines of her body, the curve of her back. It was a dress for an artist, not a wife. For a moment, a phantom memory surfaced. Clara, years ago, sketching in a notebook, her face smudged with charcoal, alight with a passion he'd never fully understood and had over time quietly extinguished. He pushed the thought away. He had made the right choice. Clara was his starter wife, the woman who had been suitable for his ascent. But to break into the stratosphere, he needed someone like Sophie, a woman who wasn't just an accessory, but a statement. Sophie's father had opened doors he couldn't have even found on his own. Their marriage was a merger, and the returns were spectacular. "Who is that?" Sophie's voice was a soft murmur, but it had an edge of steel. Her eyes were fixed on Clara. "No one important," David said a little too quickly. "Just my ex." Sophie's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "That's her, the gardener?" David flinched at the term. "Landscape architect," he corrected automatically. "It was a hobby." "Well, she's here, alone." Sophie's grip on his arm tightened. "Are you going to say hello? It would be rude not to." What she meant was, "I want to see her up close. I want to assess the threat." He knew it was a test. To ignore Clara would suggest she still held power over him. To engage was to demonstrate his complete and utter indifference. "Of course," he said smoothly. He led Sophie across the floor, feeling the subtle shift in attention as people watched them. They were the room's power couple. The approach felt like a victory lap. "Clara," he said, his voice a smooth blend of surprise and condescension. "I didn't expect to see you here." Clara turned, her face a carefully composed mask of polite neutrality. Her eyes, the color of warm whiskey, met his, and for a second he felt a jolt of the old connection, the shared language of a decade together. "David, Sophie, you make a lovely couple." "Thank you," Sophie chirped, her smile dazzling and sharp. She extended a hand, the massive diamond practically winking at Clara. "It's so brave of you to come to these things alone. I would just feel so out of place." It was a masterfully delivered insult, wrapped in a veneer of sympathy. Clara's hand didn't tremble as she shook Sophie's. "I'm here as a guest of the foundation," she said, her voice steady. "They're interested in a potential collaboration for the new conservatory gardens." David's smile tightened. A collaboration? His Clara? It had to be a lie, a pathetic attempt to save face. "That's nice," he said dismissively. "Good for you, keeping busy with your little garden business." The words hung in the air, dripping with the poison of his condescension. He saw a flicker of pain in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cool, unreadable calm. "It's more than a business, David. It's my work," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Something I'm sure you wouldn't understand." The retort, so unlike the compliant woman he remembered, caught him off guard. Before he could formulate a suitably cutting reply, she gave them a small final nod. "Enjoy your evening." She turned and walked away, her green dress shimmering under the chandeliers. David watched her go, a strange, bitter taste in his mouth. The encounter hadn't brought the smug satisfaction he'd expected. Instead, he felt an unfamiliar prickle of unease. He had wanted to show her what she'd lost, but as she disappeared into the crowd, poised and unbroken, he was left with the unsettling feeling that he was the one who had miscalculated. The balcony was a sanctuary. Clara pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the cool night air. The city's roar softened to a distant hum. Below, Central Park was a vast, dark ocean of trees under a blanket of stars. She leaned against the cold stone balustrade, taking deep, shaky breaths, willing the hot tears behind her eyes to recede. The cruelty of David's words, the polished venom in Sophie's, had landed exactly as intended. Little garden business. He had made her feel so small, reducing her life's passion to a trivial pastime. For years she had believed him. She had allowed her ambitions to shrink until they could fit into the small, decorative box he had designed for her. A quiet voice beside her broke the silence. The Gardens of Versailles theme for the rooftop terrace was a bit on the nose, don't you think? Clara turned, startled. A man stood a few feet away, leaning against the railing, his tuxedo impeccably cut but worn with a casual ease. He was tall, with dark hair and startlingly intelligent grey eyes that seemed to absorb the city lights. She didn't recognize him, yet there was an aura of quiet authority about him. "A little," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "All that rigid geometry. It feels like nature being forced to behave." "Precisely," he said, his lips curving into a slight smile. "There's no room for discovery. It's a garden that gives away all its secrets at first glance." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Not like your Elysian Fields project." Clara froze. "I'm sorry?" "Your university thesis," he clarified. "The design for a public park based on the principles of regenerative wilderness. Winding paths, hidden clearings, native species. A garden that unfolds. I remember the sketches. They were brilliant." Clara stared at him, bewildered. No one had mentioned that project in over a decade. It was a dream she'd had in another lifetime, a version of herself she had almost forgotten existed. How could you possibly know about that?" "I make it my business to know about brilliant things," he said simply. He extended a hand. "Liam Sterling." The name registered with a jolt. Liam Sterling, the reclusive tech billionaire, the man who had revolutionized data security, whose company was whispered about with the kind of reverence usually reserved for deities. He was a legend, notoriously private, almost never photographed, and he was standing on a balcony talking to her about a student project she'd completed 12 years ago. "Clara Moreau," she managed, her hand feeling small in his warm, firm grip. "I know," he said, his grey eyes holding hers. "I was a judge at the National Student Design Competition that year. Your project should have won. It was audacious. It had soul." Clara felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. She had come in second place. The loss had been a sharp disappointment, one of the first of many compromises she had made for a life with David, who had called her ambition unrealistic. You were a judge?" "A silent one. I sponsored the grant," he explained. "My sister, she was studying to be an architect. She was obsessed with your work. She believed design should serve communities, not just egos." He looked out over the park, a shadow of sadness passing over his features. "She would have loved what you're doing now." The encounter with David and Sophie had been designed to make her feel worthless. Yet here was Liam Sterling, a man of immense stature, validating a part of her she thought was long dead. He hadn't mentioned David. He hadn't offered pity. He had seen her. The landscape architect, the creator. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "No one has said anything like that to me in a very long time." "Then they haven't been paying attention," he replied, his voice soft but certain. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the city lights painting a glittering canvas before them. For the first time all evening, Clara felt her shoulders relax. The knot of humiliation in her stomach began to loosen. Liam Sterling wasn't just an anchor in her swirling sea of anxiety. He was a lighthouse, illuminating a shoreline she had forgotten she was sailing toward. A shoreline that was entirely her own. David was holding court, a half-empty glass of Macallan 25 in his hand, regaling a small circle of associates with a story about a recent acquisition. He was in his element, the center of attention, the master of his universe. But his eyes kept drifting, scanning the crowd for a flash of emerald green. He told himself it was just to ensure Clara had the good sense to leave, to not cause a scene. But a deeper, more irritating feeling gnawed at him. Her composure had unsettled him. The old Clara would have been flustered, perhaps even shed a tear. This Clara had been formidable. Then he saw her. She was on the balcony, and she wasn't alone. She was with Liam Sterling. David's story faltered mid-sentence. His associate, Mark, followed his gaze. "Is that Sterling?" Mark whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I didn't even know he was here. Who's he with?" "My ex-wife," David said, the words tasting like ash. The circle of men fell silent, their eyes flicking between the balcony and David's face. The power dynamic in the small group shifted instantly. David was no longer the focus. Liam Sterling was the sun, and everyone else was just a planet. "What the hell is Sterling doing with her?" Sophie hissed, appearing at his elbow. Her porcelain doll face was tight with anxiety. "David, do you understand who that is? My father has been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months. And he's talking to your gardener." "She's not my gardener," David snapped, his temper flaring. The insecurity was a hot, coiling snake in his gut. Why was Sterling talking to her? Had she concocted some sob story about their divorce? Was she trying to poison his reputation? The possibilities, each more damaging than the last, raced through his mind. He watched them, his jaw clenched. They weren't just talking. Clara was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile he hadn't seen on her face in years. It was the smile she used to have when she was lost in her designs, the one that had first captivated him before he'd decided it was an impractical distraction. Sterling listened intently, his focus entirely on her. They looked comfortable, intimate. A primitive, ugly jealousy clawed at David. It made no sense. He didn't want Clara. He had Sophie, the ultimate trophy. But the sight of Clara, his discarded wife, being treated as an equal by a man like Liam Sterling, was an affront. It was a violation of the narrative he had so carefully constructed, the narrative where he was the victor and she was the footnote. Clara and Sterling turned to leave the balcony, walking back into the ballroom. As they approached the grand foyer, Clara paused, as if to say goodnight. David held his breath, praying they would part ways, that this bizarre interlude would be over. But Sterling didn't let her go. He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. He said something too low for anyone to hear. And then, in the center of the grand foyer, under the full blaze of the crystal chandeliers, Liam Sterling leaned down and kissed Clara Moreau. It wasn't a dramatic, passionate clinch. It was something far more devastating. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply tender. A kiss of unmistakable meaning. It was a public declaration. 100 conversations stopped mid-sentence. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air from the room. The flashes of photographers' cameras, which had been focused on politicians and celebrities, all swiveled in their direction, erupting in a blinding strobe of light. David froze. The crystal tumbler in his hand felt slick with sweat. His vision tunneled until the only thing he could see was them. He saw the woman he had called unimportant, the woman he had dismissed and belittled, being publicly claimed, publicly treasured, by a man whose power dwarfed his own into insignificance. The kiss ended. Sterling's hand rested for a moment on the small of Clara's back as he guided her toward the exit, shielding her from the sudden onslaught of attention. The world David had built with such meticulous care, a world based on image, power, and the perception of others, didn't just crack. It shattered. In that single silent moment, he wasn't David Miller, the titan of finance. He was just the man who had let Clara Moreau go, the fool who had thrown away a diamond, convinced it was just a stone. The next morning, the world had been redrawn. Clara's face was on the cover of every society blog and gossip column. "Billionaire's mystery woman," screamed one headline. "Sterling's shocking gala kiss," declared another. Her phone buzzed incessantly on her nightstand, a frantic, angry hornet. She had turned it on silent, pulling the covers over her head as if she could hide from the tidal wave that had just crashed over her life. She felt a dizzying mix of emotions. Embarrassment at the public spectacle, fear of the unwanted attention, but also beneath it all, a strange, unfamiliar flicker of power. The pitying looks from the night before had been replaced by a firestorm of intrigue. No one was calling her David's ex-wife anymore. They were calling her Liam Sterling's mystery woman. Just after 9, a text message cut through the noise. It was from an unknown number. "Clara, I owe you an apology for the spectacle. And an explanation. Would you have dinner with me tonight? LS." Her fingers trembled as she typed a simple yes. That evening, he didn't take her to a flashy, Michelin-starred restaurant where they would be photographed. He sent a discreet car to a quiet, elegant brownstone in the West Village, which turned out to be his private residence. The interior was minimalist and warm, filled with books and art, not the cold, sterile trappings of wealth she had expected. They ate at a simple wooden table in a kitchen that was clearly used, a chef he introduced as Marco, serving them a delicious, unfussy pasta. There were no pretenses. "First," Liam began, setting down his wineglass, "I am truly sorry. I put you in an impossible position. It was impulsive and unfair to you." "Why did you do it?" Clara asked, the question she had been turning over in her mind all day. Liam's gaze was direct. "I told you about my sister Anna," he said. "She was 2 years behind you at Columbia. She followed your work obsessively. She used to say, 'Clara Moreau designs with empathy. She builds spaces that heal people.'" He paused, a wave of old grief washing over his features. "Anna passed away a few months after that competition. A car accident. Her death, it hollowed me out. When I sold my first company, I started a foundation in her name, the Anna Sterling Foundation. Its mission is to fund female architects and designers who focus on public, community-oriented projects, the kind of work she wanted to do, the kind of work you do." Clara listened, her heart aching for his loss. "I've followed your career, Clara, or rather, the lack of it," he continued, his voice hardening slightly. "I saw you win awards, get noticed, and then you married David Miller, and you disappeared. Your talent was just gone, subsumed. I saw you last night, standing alone, and I watched him approach you with his new wife. I saw the condescension in his eyes, the way he tried to make you feel small, and it made me furious." He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "It was the same look of dismissive arrogance I've seen from men in boardrooms my entire life. The look that tells a woman her ideas are cute but not serious. I felt this protective rage on your behalf, on Anna's behalf." "So the kiss," Clara prompted softly. "It was 2 things," he admitted. "One part was an impulsive human desire to show the woman I saw standing on that balcony, a woman of substance and brilliance, that she was seen, that she was valued. But the other part," he gave a wry, self-deprecating smile, "was strategic. I knew a single photograph would instantly sever you from his narrative. You would no longer be David Miller's ex. You would be your own person, linked to a new story. I wanted to give you a clean break, a public reset." He looked at her, his grey eyes searching her face. It was a gambit. A high-handed, arrogant one, perhaps. But my motives were genuine. I want to help you reclaim what was taken from you. The foundation is looking for a lead architect for its flagship project, the Anna Sterling Memorial Garden in Brooklyn Bridge Park. I want it to be you, Clara." Clara was speechless. It was a dream project, a career-defining commission. He wasn't just offering her a life raft, he was offering her a fleet. He had seen the injustice of her story and had decided, with the immense power he wielded, to help her write a new ending. The kiss was not an act of possession, but an act of liberation. For the first time in years, Clara Moreau felt the solid ground of her own potential beneath her feet. The tears that pricked her eyes were not of humiliation or sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. The photograph of the kiss was a bomb that detonated in the center of David Miller's curated life. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. On Monday morning, he was summoned to the office of his boss, Jonathan Westbrook, a man whose respect David had worked tirelessly to earn. He walked in expecting a slap on the back about a recent deal. Instead, Westbrook gestured to a chair, his face grim. On his desk lay a copy of the New York Post. The photo of Clara and Liam splashed across the page. "I got a call this morning from Sterling's office," Westbrook said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Cancelling his firm's accounts with us, all of them. That's a 9-figure portfolio, David. He gave no reason, just a change in direction. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" David felt the blood drain from his face. "Jonathan, this is my ex-wife. It has nothing to do with me." "Doesn't it?" Westbrook leaned back, his eyes like chips of ice. "The whole street is talking. Liam Sterling, who hasn't been publicly linked to a woman in a decade, is kissing your ex-wife the same weekend he pulls his business from your firm. It makes you look weak, David. It makes you look like a man who can't control his own house. And if you can't control your own house, how can you manage my client's money?" The message was clear. He was no longer an asset. He was a liability. The humiliation at work was just the beginning. At home, the atmosphere was glacial. Sophie, who had once looked at him with doe-eyed adoration, now watched him with a look of pure contempt. "This is a disaster," she said, throwing her iPad onto their white silk sofa. The screen showed an article detailing Clara's appointment as lead architect for the Anna Sterling Memorial Garden. "She's everywhere. They're calling her his muse. You told me she was a nobody. You told me she was a gardener with a hobby." "How was I supposed to know she knew Liam Sterling?" David shot back, his voice raw with frustration. "That's the point, David. You don't know anything." Sophie stood up, pacing their sterile, joyless living room. "I married you because you were powerful, because you were going places. You were supposed to elevate the Vance family name, not drag it through the mud with your messy, pathetic divorce. My father is furious. People are laughing at us." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. "I married you because you were powerful." It laid bare the truth of their relationship, a truth he had always known but had coated in a self-serving fantasy of love and desire. Their marriage was a transaction, and his stock was plummeting. The arguments became a daily ritual, each one more vicious than the last. She mocked his declining status at the firm. He accused her of being a shallow, spoiled child. The beautiful porcelain veneer of their perfect life had cracked, revealing the hollow, ugly emptiness beneath. He started drinking more, seeking solace in the bottom of a whiskey glass. He would sit alone in his study, scrolling through the endless articles about Clara and Liam. They were photographed visiting the site for the garden, deep in conversation. They looked like partners, equals. The reports spoke of Clara's visionary talent and resilient spirit. He was haunted by a memory. Years ago, Clara had tried to show him a design for a community garden in a low-income neighborhood. She had been so excited, her eyes shining. He had barely glanced at it. "There's no money in that, honey," he'd said, turning back to his market reports. "Focus on the house." Now, her vision was being funded by a billionaire, celebrated by the city, while his own carefully constructed world crumbled around him. He had thought power was about money, status, and control. But watching Clara rise from the ashes he had left her in, he began to understand. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of true worth. He had traded gold for glitter, and the bill was finally coming due. The site for the Anna Sterling Memorial Garden was a neglected 2-acre stretch of waterfront in Brooklyn Bridge Park. It was a tangle of weeds and cracked concrete, but to Clara, it was the most beautiful patch of land in New York City. It was a blank canvas. It was a promise. She threw herself into the work with a fervor she hadn't felt in a decade. The timid, accommodating woman who had tiptoed around David's ego was gone. In her place was an artist rediscovering her voice. She spent her days on site, her boots caked in mud, her hair tied back in a messy bun, sketching furiously in her notebook. She spent her nights at her drafting table, surrounded by blueprints and soil charts, fueled by coffee and a resurrected passion. Her design was the antithesis of the rigid, formal gardens of the wealthy elite. It was inspired by her old Elysian Fields project, but it was bolder, more mature. She designed a garden of healing with winding, accessible pathways that encouraged quiet contemplation. There was a sensory garden for children with disabilities, a wildflower meadow to attract native pollinators, and quiet, secluded alcoves with benches made from reclaimed timber. At its heart was a simple, elegant fountain, its gently flowing water meant to symbolize resilience and the continuity of life. Liam was a constant, quiet presence. He never interfered with her creative process, but he was always there to support it. He'd visit the site not as a billionaire benefactor, but as an engaged partner, listening intently as she explained the ecological significance of her plant choices. He learned the names of the species she selected: echinacea for strength, lavender for peace, willow for remembrance. Their relationship deepened, evolving organically from their shared purpose. They ate dinner at cheap, delicious noodle shops in her neighborhood after long days, their conversations meandering from architecture to technology to their shared, nerdy love of old science fiction novels. He made her laugh, a real deep belly laugh she hadn't realized she'd missed. One cool autumn evening, they were walking along the promenade, the lights of the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river. "You've given her a beautiful legacy," Clara said softly, looking back toward the garden site. "Anna would be so proud." "She would," Liam agreed. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his grey eyes serious in the twilight. "Clara, when I first approached you, my motives were complicated. I wanted to help you, but it was also about righting a wrong I saw done to my sister by proxy. It was about justice in a way." He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending a warm shiver through her. "But it's not about that anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. I'm not interested in your past or in David Miller. I'm interested in you, in your brilliant mind, your kind heart, and the way your face lights up when you talk about root systems." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a strategic alliance. This was real. "Liam," she started, but he silenced her by gently placing a finger on her lips. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know you're still healing. I can wait. I just wanted you to know." He didn't kiss her then. Instead, he simply took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, and they continued their walk. The gesture was more intimate, more profound than the public kiss that had shattered her old world. That kiss had been about liberation. This, the quiet holding of her hand, the patient promise in his eyes, was about building something new. She was no longer David Miller's ex-wife or Liam Sterling's pet project. She was Clara Moreau, the architect of her own life, standing beside a man who didn't want to dim her light, but wanted to watch her shine. And in the soil of her own reclaimed garden, a new and unexpected love was beginning to take root. David's world had shrunk. He lost the corner office, then the title, and finally the job itself. They called it a restructuring, but he knew the truth. He was tainted goods. His marriage was a hollow shell, filled only with Sophie's bitter recriminations and the silence of their separate bedrooms. He was adrift in the wreckage of his own making. In his desperation, his thoughts turned obsessively to Clara. She was the epicenter of his downfall, the cause of his humiliation. But she was also, his deluded mind began to whisper, his only way out. If he could just get back in her good graces, if he could somehow leverage her connection to Sterling, maybe he could salvage something. He found her one afternoon at the garden site. She was talking to a foreman, pointing at a blueprint, her expression animated and confident. She looked more vibrant, more alive than he had ever seen her. The sight of her, so completely in her element, sent a pang of something he couldn't name, envy, regret, loss, through him. He waited until she was alone, then approached, plastering a carefully rehearsed, remorseful smile on his face. "Clara," he said, his voice soft. She turned, and her smile vanished, replaced by a look of weary guardedness. "David, what are you doing here?" "I just wanted to see it," he said, gesturing vaguely at the burgeoning landscape. "It's incredible. You're incredible. I always knew you had this in you." The lie was so bald-faced it was almost comical. Clara's expression didn't change. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize," he said, trying to inject as much sincerity as he could muster. "For everything. I was an idiot, Clara. Ambitious and blind. I didn't appreciate you. I see that now." He took a step closer. "I miss our talks. I miss my friend." He was playing his last card, nostalgia. He was hoping to awaken some dormant ember of the life they had shared, the history that bound them. But Clara didn't even flicker. She simply looked at him with a profound, dispassionate clarity that chilled him to the bone. "We were never friends, David," she said, her voice devoid of anger, which was somehow worse. "Friends don't systematically dismantle each other's confidence. Friends don't call their partner's life's work a little hobby. Friends don't try to shrink someone so they can feel bigger." Each word was a calm, precise incision. "You're not here to apologize," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "You're here because your life is falling apart and you think I'm a life raft. You think you can manipulate me, use my connection to Liam to get back on your feet. You see me not as a person, but as an angle to be played." He opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came. She had seen right through him, down to the rotten core of his intentions. The realization that she knew him so completely and was so utterly unmoved was the most profound defeat of his life. "The woman you're looking for, the one who would have accepted your hollow apologies and soothed your bruised ego, she doesn't exist anymore," Clara said, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "You destroyed her, and from her ashes I built myself. So thank you for that, I suppose." She gave him a final, dismissive look. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned her back on him and walked away, her focus already returned to the garden, to her creation, to her future. David stood alone amidst the dirt and the saplings, the city buzzing around him. The rejection was absolute. It wasn't fiery or dramatic. It was calm, clinical and complete. It was the closing of a door he hadn't even realized he'd left open. He had come here seeking a lifeline, but all he found was the final crushing confirmation of his own irrelevance. He had hit rock bottom, and there was no one left to blame but himself. 6 months later, the air was crisp with the promise of spring. The Anna Sterling Memorial Garden was ready for its grand unveiling. The space was unrecognizable from the derelict plot it had once been. It was a living, breathing tapestry of color, texture, and life. Wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze from the river. The sound of the central fountain was a soothing murmur, and the winding paths invited exploration and peace. Clara stood on a small dais, Liam by her side, addressing the crowd of city officials, donors, and journalists. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress, her face radiant, her voice clear and strong as she spoke about the power of public spaces to heal and connect communities. She spoke of Anna Sterling's vision and of the garden as a testament to resilience. She was poised, articulate, and utterly magnetic. From the very back of the crowd, shielded by the shade of a newly planted maple tree, David watched. He was a ghost at the feast. He looked different. The expensive, tailored suit was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. There were lines of exhaustion around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was thinner, humbled. His marriage to Sophie had ended a few months prior, not with a bang, but with the quiet signing of papers. Her father had made sure he walked away with nothing but his own debts. He had taken a junior analyst position at a small boutique firm, the kind of job he would have sneered at just a year ago. He lived in a small apartment in Queens. His world, once a glittering skyscraper, had been reduced to a walk-up. He hadn't come here to cause trouble or to try and speak to Clara. He had come because he needed to see it. He needed to understand. He listened to her speak, and for the first time, he heard her. He wasn't listening for how her words reflected on him. He was just listening. He saw the way she connected with the crowd, the passion in her eyes as she described the garden's design. He saw the quiet, steady way Liam looked at her, a look of pure, unadulterated admiration and love. And finally, he understood. He had thought Clara's light was something to be managed, controlled, and, if necessary, dimmed, lest it outshine his own. He had never grasped that her light was a force that could have warmed them both. His greatest failure wasn't losing his job or his trophy wife. His greatest failure was standing next to a sun and complaining that it was too bright. As the crowd erupted in applause, David turned to leave. He didn't feel the bitter envy or rage he had expected. He felt a profound, aching sadness, a grief for the man he could have been and the life he could have had if he hadn't been so blinded by his own hollow ambition. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about connection, partnership and soul, all the things he had willingly traded away. Clara, finishing her speech, happened to glance toward the edge of the crowd. She saw a flicker of a familiar figure turning to walk away. Her heart gave a single strange beat, not of pain or anger, but of a distant, detached pity, a chapter closing for good. Then Liam's hand found hers, his fingers warm and steady. She squeezed it, turning her face back to him, back to the sun, back to the beautiful, thriving garden she had built from the ruins. David's path was his own now, a long, uncertain road toward finding a self-worth that couldn't be measured in dollars or headlines. Her path was here, in the rich, fertile soil of her own making, a future waiting to bloom. From the ashes of a painful past, Clara didn't just find revenge. She found herself. Her story is a powerful testament that your true value is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. It's about cultivating your own garden, nurturing your own passions, and having the courage to bloom even after the harshest winter. If you were inspired by Clara's journey from heartbreak to healing and empowerment, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own strength and subscribe for more stories of resilience and redemption. What part of Clara's comeback resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below.